Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk metal. For this episode, excuse me, I'm already losing my voice. That's not a good sign. But for this episode, I'm going to be talking about three heavy metal albums from the mid 1980s that have two things in common. First, they are all good. And second, they were all recently sent to me by Dave over at the Heavy Metal Overkill channel. Hopefully, folks have been checking out his new channel. If not, there's a link to it in the description down below, so please go check it out. He's been putting up several videos, really fun stuff. He shows off a lot of cool things. He's really into Japanese import versions of classic metal albums, for example. And he was recently on Heavy Metallurgy with Marty and I, and we had a really good episode with him there too. When we were doing that episode, we talked about lots of different bands and albums, of course. And, as we went through them, someone was like, oh, that one's cool. Oh, yeah, I've never really checked that out. And apparently, Dave was taking a lot of notes on what I did not have or hadn't really paid much attention to. And so he fixed me up with copies of a few things. He mentioned in the notes he sent with the box that, yeah, he had some duplicates and thought, yeah, I might really like checking these out. So a huge thank you, David, for sending those over. Really appreciate it. It's always been cool having you as part of the overall heavy metallurgy community. So without further ado, let's see what David sent. First up, we have an album by Chastain. This one's called The Voice of the Cult. This is the fourth album under the Chastain band name. Now, Dave Chastain, of course, has been in a lot of bands. He's recorded some things under his name, David Chastain. But I think most people are familiar with, him working with the Chastain band itself. There were other projects too, like CJSS and Spike. But yeah, this is kind of the flagship band for most folks. And it turns out this is the fourth album in the Chastain discography, which, yeah, I had mentioned I'm not really familiar with. And I never avoided Chastain for any reason. I just didn't come across the stuff a lot. Albums were originally on Leviathan Records, which I didn't come across a lot of Leviathan vinyl here and there. I think I had a Candlemass album that had been licensed by Leviathan, so I had a couple of things, but in general, I just didn't see a lot of Chastain records out and about. I knew of them. I knew he was one of these guitar shredder guys, and that they had, like a female vocalist in Leather Leone with like a really gruff, forceful voice. I heard some songs from Chastain here and there, just never stumbled into any of their albums. And David felt like that needed to be rectified, and so he sent me this one. I've played it a few times now, and yeah, it's a very good, very solid album. If there's two things that kind of stand out to me about it right away, one, yeah, even though you've got a hotshot guitar player, he is not dominating the album. He's not trying to hog the spotlight or anything like that. These are still really solid, sort of just classic traditional heavy metal songs in that 1980s US style. So he's a big part of the sound. But yeah, this isn't like Ingwe albums where there's Ingwe and then there's maybe a few other guys hanging around. These really do feel like, band efforts. And the other thing, of course, yeah, are the vocals of Leather. A really good picture of the band here. I think it's a cool picture of Leather. They look very casual here. They're not, yeah, trying to be overly, anything in particular. The hair is a little big, but yeah, it's 1988. That was how everybody's hair looked. Leather's vocals, again, very forceful in here. She had, a very, sort of, gruff delivery to her voice. At times, it almost feels like it's a little too forceful for the material here. It's like, wow, you could be singing for like, a thrash band at the more extreme end of things. And Chastain's just kind of working again. Think like, the metal church school of just good, pure, traditional heavy metal music. So yeah, it's really interesting, having her, give it that extra dimension of heaviness, through the vocal delivery in particular. This is a reissue on Shadow Kingdom Records. I had forgotten that Shadow Kingdom had reissued some of the Chastain stuff. It's on a really cool kind of blue splatter vinyl, which I'm always a sucker for colored vinyl stuff. And yeah, I can't really say how this compares to other stuff in the Chastain catalog since I've heard very, very little of it. I looked up and read a few reviews of the album since I've been checking it out. The general sentiment seems to be that it's very similar to the previous album in particular, the third Chastain album. I think, most people seem to still gravitate, towards the debut, which, yeah, let's see, the title escapes, but that's why I've got Metal Archives open over here. Oh, sorry, yeah, not the debut, the al second album, Ruler of the Wasteland. That's usually the one I do hear people reference. But yeah, a lot of reviews seemed to mention that The Voice of the Cult is pretty similar to The Seventh of Never, which was the third album that had come out. Let's see. Yeah, just a year earlier in 1987. So if you're familiar with that one and you never checked this one out, apparently they're fairly comparable. Yeah. So moving forward with Chastain, it's one I'll definitely be keeping more of an eye out for. Am I going to run out and buy tons of Chastain albums right away? No. And that's not any kind of, indictment against Chastain. It's just something I'm trying not to do as much of in recent years. There was a time where I'd hear something like this, be like, hey, that's pretty good. Let's go see if I can buy five more Chastain albums all at one big time. I've learned over the years that's not a great way for me to absorb music. That those albums then just blur together. None of them get quite enough attention. So yeah, instead of doing that, what I'll do is keep Chastain in mind. And, when I'm at a record shop or a record show and I see one for a decent price, there's a much higher chance that it's going to come home with me. So yeah, might be checking out more of Chastain in the future. Moving on to album number two here in a moment. Now, I didn't put any sound clips in this video. These are all reasonably well-known bands, so nothing horribly obscure here. Also, some of these probably do have copyrights on them, so I figured no need for sound clips. You can easily, of course, look the stuff up on YouTube, Spotify, or other places if you want to check out what they sound like. But yeah, so from starting out in Ohio with Chastain, we'll jump over to California. And Dave sent me a reissue of Griffin's debut album, Flight of the Griffin. Always kind of like the cover on this. Always thought it was kind of interesting that the Griffin's got this big cross on a chain around its neck. For most metal bands, you'd assume it'd have to be like an upside down cross or a pentagram or something. Griffin weren't a Christian band, but yep, they still had that included, and that's fine. It works with the art just great. So yeah, reissue here. Um, Back cover layout. As far as I remember, this is pretty similar to the original back covers layout. It's a little interesting because the picture, it's a good picture of the band, but it's kind of small. You've got a lot of empty black space on this cover. In terms of layout, I probably would have put like, side A and side B side by side and maybe tried to get the picture a little bigger. But this was 1984. It was on Shrapnel. Shrapnel was not the biggest or most influential label. I've definitely noticed in the past year or two, as I've stumbled into a few old Shrapnel albums in the wild, that Shrapnel did actually have a pretty good catalog. I think again, Shrapnel sometimes catches a little flack and gets pigeonholed as a label for, just again, guitar shred guys. So it's like, well, if you want to hear some guy just, play as fast as he can, that's Shrapnel. But Shrapnel did have a lot of quality bands on the label too. And they put out a lot of very solid albums. They just didn't have the same visibility as something like Metal Blade. And over time, yeah, they got that kind of stigma associated with them. Part of that being because some of their earliest releases, like the US Metal compilation series, I think there's 3 volumes of that. Those really did focus on, here's a, band. It's just a guy's name though, and he's just, yeah, going to town on the guitar. So, I mean, the reputation wasn't without reason, but it may have spilled over into the rest of the catalog too much. Don't be afraid to give Shrapnel releases a chance if you stumble upon one for a good price. That looks interesting. And Griffin should definitely look interesting. Yeah, cool cover photo. This album, now I've heard this plenty of times before. I just never had owned a copy of it. I had it back from tape trading days. I had it from CDR trading days. And it's been in the back of my mind for a while. This is one I wouldn't mind picking up. I just hadn't come across a nice copy of it, in the wild for a reasonable price. When I would see it, it would either be way too expensive or the condition would be pretty iffy. So I hadn't got around to picking it up yet. But yeah, so a huge thanks to Dave for sending this along. Hadn't played this in forever and kind of had forgotten just how good it is. Griffin, if you're unfamiliar with them, they operate in the general Iron Maiden influenced school of bands. That, of course, applies to hundreds of bands through the early and mid 1980s. But Griffin do a really good job of it. The lyrics have, a definite fantasy edge to them, but they're a little more vivid and imaginative than maybe the typical band that was trying to cobble something together. And playing this again for the first time in years, a lot of these songs instantly came back. Tracks like Hawk the Slayer, which was always a cool title. It has a spoken intro. The vocalist is very distinctive. He's not necessarily, the greatest singer in history, but he's got a very unique voice that works really great for this material. So I always liked him. Heavy Metal Attack, yeah, is kind of, again, a generic song title, but the delivery here is really, really strong. Hell Runneth Over is a cool track. So yeah, there's a good variety here. If you like that classic mid-80s sound, again, this one came out in 84, and it very much feels like a 1984 metal release. Even though it's not on Metal Blade, it certainly could have been. In a way, it does feel a little bit more like a Metal Blade release. This was also licensed through Steamhammer for Europe, if I remember right. So some folks may have the Steamhammer version instead of the Shrapnel version. Yeah, I'm happy with this reissue version of it for sure. Really fun getting to hear Griffin again for the first time. They made one other album, Protectors of the Lair, and it's kind of the same case. I haven't heard it in ages. I remember it being quite good, and I'll, pick that one up when I find the right copy for the right price for me. All right, moving on to third and last album that David had in the box. Uh, this is one I'd been meaning to go back and revisit for a while, and David decided I should do that now, and I'm glad I did because it worked out really good. It is a reissue of the debut Nasty Savage album. This was another one that I had back in the day. I had it on a used cassette tape. I am almost certain I got it at a record exchange, which was a really good chain. I don't know how extensive they were. They were pretty common in the Southeast. And Record Exchange was nice because even though it was a bigger chain, you could take stuff in, trade it in for store credit. So it was a way to get rid of some of the stuff that you had picked up that you really didn't like, and save a few bucks. And they always had the used stuff really, really cheap. Like again, a lot of the used cassette tapes were $1, $2 a piece, maybe $3 on occasion. They'd have used vinyl that was only a few dollars a piece. I know one time I got a bunch of the 12-inch Iron Maiden EPs, like the Aces High EP, and I think I was paying like, maybe $1 or $2 a piece for them at Record Exchange. Even a lot of their UCDs in later years would only be a couple of bucks. I got a copy of Forbidden Twisted into Form on CD for $1 at Record Exchange once. So yeah, I always really liked that store and that chain. It's another one, of course, that's kind of, gone the way of the Dodo and Camelot and Record Bar and Peaches, and yeah, most record stores. Manifest, I think, is completely gone at this point as well. Anyway, I had gotten the Nasty Savage as a used cassette tape, and I probably had gotten it like in a pile of used cassette tapes that day. So while I had it and I played it, it never really stood out to me. Um, it just didn't. It's like, okay, it's, kind of, typical mid-80s Metal Blade fare. This one came out in 85, originally on Metal Blade. And I played it and it was all right. But yeah, it just never really connected with me. And I think it really did just get kind of, lost in the sea of stuff I was picking up around that time. Now, a few years ago, I picked up the Nasty Savage EP that came out a couple of years after this. Um, it was a little bit of a whim. I found it for a really cheap price because the condition wasn't great. I mean, and the guy was upfront about it. He said, "Yeah, this one's got some wear on it. It's not that clean." But I was like, "Well, for what you're asking, that's understandable." So I picked it up and did enjoy revisiting it. And so I've been having it in my mind. It's like, I really should go back and replay the debut album sometime. But I checked, I didn't have it on MP3s. Yes, I know I could type Nasty Savage into YouTube and listen to it anytime. There's always something that you're trying to listen to. You can't listen to all of it at once. You can't listen to all of it this week or this month or this year. So I just hadn't got back around to the Nasty Savage album yet. But yeah, hearing it this time, I'm actually really impressed with the album. Yeah, the cover obviously did it no favors. I didn't hold that against it at any point, but yeah, it's a terrible idea for a cover. I understand Metal Blade was always on a bit of a budget, even in 1985, but this isn't artwork. This is just the logo. Uh, so yeah, and it was always kind of a strange name for a band. And they were sort of a strange band. They had a kind of a unique vibe to them. They were, of course, out of Florida. They're uh, not a thrash band, but they do have some of the like muscular aggressiveness of thrash. But it feels like it's always reined in just a little bit, where it really fits more in like, again, a traditional heavy metal template, but it's really kind of straining to, push out of that and into something that's a little more aggro in nature. But the songs are all extremely well composed. Now, one thing I did always like about this album, I thought it was a great set of band photos. Even though I haven't had that cassette tape for decades, I've always remembered the pictures. The band was best known for, Nasty Ronnie, the front man, being crazy, smashing up television sets, stuff like that. So yeah, you've got the great picture of him and having like, that orange red lighting in the background really, helps give him a little bit more of that kind of, crazy demonic look. But I thought all the other band pictures were always cool too. This guy having, the denim vest over the jacket, yeah, with, the blonde hair going all over the place. It's, the drummer who's doing, the fire breathing trick there in the background. And even these guys down here, this guy just always looked kind of scary, creepy, with his head laying completely over. You can't tell, like, is he drunk, asleep, stoned, passed out, or is he deciding if he's just going to beat the crap out of you? I don't know. And this guy over here too, looking extremely intense. Just the expression on the face. Um, he's got, kind of a longer face. It always makes me think a little bit of like, the Joker from Batman, just in terms of, the general dimensions. So yeah, the pictures of the band always made an impression. It was just that, yeah, the album got kind of, lost along the way. But it is really good music. Lyrically, some of these, actually, to be honest, several of these are a bit simple. There's some pretty cheesy lyrics. But musically, yeah, it feels pretty tight, dark, and aggressive. And in that sense, the album reminds me of Metal Church's The Dark, which again is kind of Metal Church at their heaviest, really pushing a little towards that thrash label that never really fit Metal Church, but we kept trying to apply it to them back then. But yeah, the one knock against The Dark is, the lyrics are a little, yeah, they could have used a little help writing some of the lyrics. Maybe Nasty Savage needed a little help in the lyrical department, but the music on here is really good. And there's some variety to it as well. Like Fear Beyond the Vision almost has like a King Diamond type thing going on. Yeah, Ronnie's got some range to his vocals, but he's not doing it in like this, really classy, look how many octaves I can cover kind of way. He's like, "Ah, I'm just going to throw in these really like, high, shrill kind of screams from time to time, and they're going to work. So yeah, Fear Beyond the Vision is really cool. Things like Middle Nights, Gladiator, again, really simple lyrical ideas, but the songs are tight enough that they work. They're fun songs. They're enjoyable. There's another, oh, on side two, Instigators, a track. I really like the way this song is put together. It's one of the slightly longer ones. There's more lyrics to that one. All fits really nicely. We used to have stuff like, Dungeon of Pleasure, which, yeah, again, cheesy 80s metal S&M type lyrics. But this band had the chops to actually pull this off without them just feeling kind of like a, Lord, here we go, another song about Mistress Spanks a lot. It's like, this one's actually kind of fun. It holds together. Psychopath's good as well. End of Time. It's just a really, yeah, solid album. And it's a good example for me of why sometimes you got to go back and give things another chance. I don't always give things enough spins. Sometimes you get things in these big piles of used tapes or a big, distro sale or something. You order 10 things at once. It can be hard to really work through all of them, give them all a fair shake, and figure them out. I think with the Nasty Savage debut, it probably was just that kind of thing. I don't know how many, cheap tapes I bought at Record Exchange that day. It was probably 1993, I'm thinking. So, yeah, what is it, 32 years later? I don't remember the exact sales receipt for the day. Just that Nasty Savage was one of many cheap things I got at a record exchange near Virginia Tech's campus. But it got lost in the wash. But the problem was that then I'd always kind of assumed it was just programmed in the back of my mind. I was like, yeah, I guess it wasn't that hot because, yeah, I didn't really keep with it over the years. A good example of why we do sometimes need to go back and give albums a second chance. It's been a long time since we've heard some things. If you've been listening to a particular genre of music for a long time, you cannot hear every album once a year or once every 6 months. You're going to get to a point where some things just don't get played for years and years and years at a time. And while, of course, we really like to go back and revisit the albums we know and love, sometimes it's also a worthwhile exercise to go back and check out the things that you didn't like so much. You know, our tastes change, our frame of reference expands, and yeah, sometimes we develop an appreciation for things that back in the day we couldn't really enjoy. Or again, something that we heard, but it just kind of slipped through the cracks in an unfortunate circumstance. So yeah, big thank you to David for sending this one my way. Yes, this will definitely be given a strong thumbs up whenever Nasty Savage comes up moving forward for sure. Uh, I've had that one programmed in my brain wrong for a long time. Now we've got that kind of reprogrammed and set the record straight. All right, that is going to do it. Once again, thank you today for the cool VCLT box. It's always fun, getting stuff like that, and it's fun sending stuff like that to other folks too. Um, yeah, again, the whole idea is you just send somebody music you think they might enjoy it. If they don't, it doesn't matter. They don't owe you anything for it. They didn't pay for it. This is not a quid pro quo kind of, setup whatsoever. Just like, so and so mentioned they might like to hear this band. I've got a copy of it sitting around I'm not using. Don't want it. Yeah, put it in the mail. Yeah, give somebody a nice surprise. So let's now talk metal in the comments down below. What's an example that you've had like this experience with Nasty Savage? Something that you heard back in the day didn't really, connect with you, and then much, much later, you gave it another chance and you realized like, oh, wow, that's actually really, really good. I love that now. I think that happens to a lot of folks. So share one of your stories along those lines in the comments down below for other folks to enjoy as well. All right, let's wrap this up and get it ready to upload. Until next time, everybody take care. And as always, keep banging your head.